Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined by several awesome co-hosts, plus a guest this week. First, my brother and bro host, Shane Kelly. How are you doing, Shane?
Doing great. Had a really good day. I got to visit a revolving sushi bar today.
Ooh.
Made my day.
Whoa. Thanks for the invite.
And Nate Heininger. How are you doing, Nate?
I am fantastic. I'm so happy to finally get a chance to talk about this game.
I know you are, Nate.
It came out like a month ago. Why did it take us so long to do an episode? It's off-brand for me to not be already ranting about this game. I've been doing it on Twitter. I'm finally here to talk about this game on the podcast.
You can blame me, Nate. I am a strategy dunce. And we have a special guest this week. I am super happy to have on the show Sandy Bledsoe.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have Sandy on the show today. I met Sandy down the block from my house. You guys know that I have been raving about how much I love Coral Sword, the new board game cafe. Would that be the right way to describe it?
Yeah. That's this. There's a cafe is the best word we've found, but it doesn't quite encompass all of the nuance to the whole thing. But cafe seems like the most accessible word.
It's incredible. Well, Sandy,
tavern is one we've kicked around too. Tavern.
Yeah, I love that. I as an RPG lover, I think tavern is a place. A tavern is a place I could feel at home.
Yeah.
So Sandy is the managing partner there at Coral Sword, and
one of.
Sandy,
I don't want to give David credit where it's due, but one of the managing partners.
One of the managing partners.
Hail and well met, Marky.
When I first went in there, I just assumed you were the coolest, friendliest barista that I'd ever met, and then I realized, wait, his name is on the liquor license application on the front door, so he must have some importance here. But Sandy has. It's been really nice getting to know you. He's been helping me run my Dungeons and Dragons game down there from Coral Sword. Mm-hmm. And Sandy streams video games on the Twitch TV channel for Coral Sword, which is where I realized that we had this fun, awesome Into the Breach game in common. We were both currently obsessed with it. Probably, I would say on this show, I'm the worst at the game, though, so that's probably my shame. But
I don't know about that. I think we're competing for last place, and Nate and Sandy are going to be duking it out at the top, but we'll see.
Well, Sandy, some of the people listening to this show will have heard me rant about how much I love Coral Sword, but would you mind, for those who might have missed that, tell us a little bit about the shop and about yourself?
So Coral Sword is the sort of tagline we've come up with is your friendly neighborhood games cafe. And gaming cafe has a sort of gambling connotation here in Texas, I feel like.
Do you guys have slots?
Yeah, if you're looking for a gaming spot, the gas station by my house has some fruit machines.
Oh, that's good to know. Is that the Citgo or whatever that's right there?
Yeah, you know it.
And when I drove through, I think it was South Dakota, and like everything labeled themselves as having a casino. Come to our casino. Like our gas station has a casino. No. And what I learned is what they mean by casino is just like a dark corner with like 8 slot machines in it. And that's their version of a casino. So
Sandy, does Coral Sword have a dark corner with 8 slot machines in it?
No, not yet. But we talked about pinball machines and maybe arcade games, but we kind of wanted to see how busy we were going to be, what the volume was going to be like, and if it would make sense, because the revenue per square foot on a pinball machine is pretty dismal, and but it's a lot of fun.
Some great business advice for our listeners.
And so there's a lot of different ways to think about how to make money in business, and revenue per square foot is one of them. But if you have things that pinball machines just, if they make $3 a day and they take up a huge amount of space, then you have to examine why you ever thought about doing that.
What is the revenue per square foot of Shane's D&D group?
It's actually pretty good. They spend money. They do they're nice people, and they pull their weight. But
all right, I'll stop interrupting you with stupid quips.
No, you're fine. So Coral Sword originally started out as just kind of like a coffee shop with comics and board games. We pivoted. We leaned into games really hard, and now it's like it's much more about board games, coffee. We're waiting for our beer and wine permit.
I'm waiting too.
We're sort of leaning also into the e-game sort of community. There's actually an event at the shop tonight. It's our first Street Fighter tournament, Street Fighter 5 tournament. Shane just had this look at his face like, why am I podcasting right now instead of being at this event?
Yeah, we were actually tuned into that, or at least I was on Twitch just before you signed on. I'm not actually a huge Street Fighter guy, but I wanted to check it out. And you guys have like an extremely professional looking, really nice streaming setup.
Yeah. And so this is a great time to mention that my business partner David and I linked up with our mutual friend Ming Chen, who's on the TV show called Comic Book Men on AMC, and he's one of our business partners. And but also we have the great fortune to be in business with Hunter Pence and his wife Lexi, and they basically kind of approached us with this plan for this streaming booth and said we think it'd be really cool to add this streaming space that we can run competitions and tournaments and I literally didn't know anything about this stuff. Like, you guys just had to teach me how to use Skype, and like I watched a couple YouTube videos that allowed me to use Wineskin to get into the breach on my Mac, but I am pretty much a Luddite when it comes to computers. I didn't know what Twitch was at the time, and it'll probably take me 30 minutes to find this podcast alone on iTunes.
Yeah, you're not alone.
It takes anybody. Yeah, unfortunately.
That is a judgment of your skills on iTunes, but also maybe the ranking of our podcast alongside.
Maybe I should have given it a more distinctive name that doesn't collide on Google with a documentary about 12-year-old golfers.
Oh, what? No.
Yeah, no, that's the bane of our
existence.
That's
a real thing?
Yeah, The Short Game.
No.
It's a documentary. I think it's on Netflix. They've
offensive.
SEO'd us to hell.
Like once every 6 months too, we'll get like an email or something from someone who's like, "Are you gonna make a sequel?" Or like, "I love the movie," or whatever.
That's
but hey, what are the kids doing now?
Yeah, we have
amazing.
finally. If you just Google The Short Game, and I pray that you do, we have finally reached we're on the front page.
There.
We're on the front page. It's like
Excellent.
10 IMDb things, and then
we did it, America. We're on the front page of Google. If you Google the name of this podcast,
yeah, we made it.
Everything is. If there's anything I've learned in business, it's that it's all about compounded annual growth, right?
Yes.
And that's
we're number 10.
But 10 is someday is 9, and 9 is someday 8. And
yeah, man.
But as long as they don't put out a sequel, if they put out a sequel, you're screwed.
I know.
I was wondering actually who named Coral Sword.
Oh, that's a great question. That was David, and I have to give David
Final
credit
Fantasy
for being
fan,
a real driving force, behind this business. And David, he was the one who really took it from being like a late night conversation in his kitchen to being a really fully fleshed business. He is a big Final Fantasy fan. I've only played 7, 10. 11 and 10-2, and that's kind of where I
feel like that's a reasonable amount of Final Fantasy.
Yeah, no, that's probably more than I. So the whole concept of this show is games that you can finish in a reasonable amount of time, which means that literally no Final Fantasy game will ever be covered here.
I played the first one on iPhone. That's my extent of Final Fantasy.
Yeah, they're pretty long narratives, but really a lot of them are very beautiful games, and some of them, especially the early ones, are more tactical RPGs like this, but then some of the later ones are a little bit more open world. 7 is really a masterpiece. 10 is my favorite, and people make fun of me for that, but
that's the only one I've sunk significant hours into, and I'm gonna make fun of you for that.
Yeah, wait, that's I think the only one I've played a lot of too. That's the one with
the
PS2 water ball or
yeah,
whatever,
with underwater basketball.
They had its own sport. Yeah. They had its own sport.
Blurns ball or whatever.
Yeah, Blurns ball. That was it.
10-2 was also I played through all of 10-2, and they probably didn't need to make that game, but it was I think it was an attempt to capture some of like the sort of female gamer demographic. And my understanding is it was pretty widely panned, but I ate it up. I loved it. So, but David's the big, he's the old school Final Fantasy fan. And the name was definitely his idea.
Right, it's a good name. Yeah. It also sounds a little bit, I like, combining that with tavern, it sounds a little bit like the kind of name you'd find on a fantasy tavern. I really like it. So that's an amazing sounding place, and I really wish that it was in my neighborhood here in Denver.
Come to Houston, Reagan.
Yeah, I'm gonna soon, hopefully. But, and Coral Sword will be on my list, absolutely. But we're here to talk today about Into the Breach. And Into the Breach, the game that brings us all together today. So I'll just do the very most brief of intros, and then I'll let Nate explain it, because Nate is probably the driving force behind us covering this game. I mean, longtime listeners will remember our episode about FTL. This is a game from the developers of FTL, Subset Games. And FTL was the first game that really made us kind of re-examine and bend our rules about what we count as a short game on this program. Because my original rule about this show, was games under 10 hours. And that doesn't quite encompass a game like FTL, which even I played for dozens of hours, and Nate played for hundreds of hours.
I'm in the hundreds, yeah.
But we decided sort of at that point that we wanted to sort of flex our definition of a short game to games that have short play sessions as well, when we felt that sort of mattered, when it was a game that we... sort of the tagline for this show is games that fit
when it was made
life.
By Subset Games.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, right. So games that respect your time is the kind of driving force here. And FTL was very much a game that respected your time. It had short, meaningful play sessions that built on each other, but still felt like very self-contained, and that you could pick up and complete in a relatively reasonable amount of time and fit into a reasonable schedule. FTL was an amazing game, a game that I loved. We'll have a link in the show notes of this episode to our episode on FTL, which was, how long ago was that? Like 3 years ago?
That was episode number 5.
Was it episode 5? Yeah.
So
oh my God, it's been so long.
Though, if I don't know where we have Laura's tracking doc, but I have to imagine that I've mentioned FTL, or you guys have forced me to mention
every
FTL.
2 to 3 episodes for years.
Yeah. So, and this game falls in that same category. We've had a couple other roguelikes where, as long as the experience that you're going through is unique and worthwhile, then the overall amount of time you put into it can still qualify. So we're, whereas I don't know, like Skyrim, it's going to be 100 hours, but like 75 of those hours are like walking around and traveling, or repeating the same sort of quest over and over to get to something. This is a game that you're choosing to have an experience with, whether it's win, loss, or whatever. You're sitting down to start, and you're probably in that play session. You're probably also finishing that experience. Now, some of these games like FTL...
Now we're done justifying why this game is on the show. We don't need to anymore. I mean, of course, if you have something else to say about it, please do, Nate. But I felt like we needed to set that up a little bit, but also... Screw you, this is our show. We're going to talk about this game because it's awesome.
There's no podcast police going to come and bust us for violating our premise.
Pod crimes.
Just imagine the door getting kicked in on Shane and some dude's just running in.
You have a loose premise to your show and you're not sticking to it. But you kind of are.
Why are they going after all of the other shows first?
Right. It's a beautiful game.
Yeah.
It is.
So this is a very highly anticipated game. FTL was a huge hit. The developers spent a long time on it, and then they released a expansion to it, a free expansion called Advanced Edition, that just made the game even more dense, even more brilliant. And they spent a long time after that not really sure what to do, because they really didn't want to make FTL 2. They wanted to make a whole new game, a whole new experience. And I mean, Advanced Edition came out in 2012, I believe, maybe 2013. No. So it's been several years.
I know. How old are we all?
Come out?
Googling it now.
This is stuff that we should know if we're. Reagan will pull that up.
It came out. Oh boy. It came out on Microsoft Windows, OS X, and Linux. Wikipedia lists it September 14th, 2012.
Yeah, okay.
The iOS version came out in April of 2014. So that was a couple of years after the initial version. I definitely played it on my computer, but I put much more time into this on my iPad than I did on my computer.
Yeah. I have nothing to show for those years.
Yeah.
those years were just all spent on FTL. Shit.
There is one thing I do want to set up, though. On the show, whenever we have like a sequel or a highly anticipated like next game from a developer, we do have a tendency to spend a lot of time comparing the two, and I think that'll be really easy to do with this game. But I actually think the developer spent a lot of time to try to make it something that was totally unique. And not just the same experience from FTL, and I really think they accomplished that. So I'm gonna try very hard, even though FTL is like my favorite game of all time, to not compare this game to FTL. I think there's a lot of stuff that it does that is they learned from FTL, and that we might be able to like have that in its own section. But I think this game stands on its own and is very, very different in what you're doing, how you do it, and kind of like why you're doing it than FTL. And I think that's a testament to the developers, not just like rehashing their same idea. So I think we need to make sure that we stick with what the game is and not how it compares to FTL.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not just very different. I think in some ways, now this will probably vary from person to person here, but in some ways I like this game better than FTL. I think that and I haven't sunk nearly as much time into it as I have into FTL, and so maybe that'll change with time. But this game was a huge surprise. I'm not a huge sort of tactical strategy game person. I don't really like the XCOM games, for example. I've played some, but not a ton.
Get out.
Yeah, I know. Not a huge fan.
I love XCOM, and I love, speaking of Final Fantasy, earlier, Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah,
is I had that for the Game Boy Advance in high school.
It's a good touchstone for this game. Very, very
paid more attention
elements
to that than I did to the classes that I was in while playing it.
I would actually compare this, or my touchstone for this game was more Advance Wars. We covered a game maybe a year or more ago on this program called Warbits. That's sort of a modern, smartphone-based kind of rehash of the Advance Wars kind of concepts, the sort of slimmed down tactics game. And this actually, it's like more complicated or, more tactically interesting than Advance Wars in a bunch of ways, but also pairs back from games like Advance Wars in some really, really interesting ways. I think it's a really fascinating kind of development on this style of tactics game. So we'll probably talk a little later, once we have talked a little more about like how this game actually works or what it's about. We'll probably talk a little more about comparing it to other games. But for me, as a big Advance Wars fan, this did a lot for me in that same way, while still really surprising me with some interesting like twists on it that were very not Advance Wars based. The thing that I hated most about Advance Wars is being 30 minutes into a battle and realizing that I screwed something up 25 minutes ago that has meant that the entire time I've spent has been a waste of time. That has never happened in this game. It is so tight. It is so like puzzle box tight that it's...
when you've lost, you kind of know for a lot of reasons, and we'll go into more, but you are keenly aware when you're about to lose or have made a big mistake in this game, because it telegraphs just about everything.
So Sandy, or maybe Nate, I don't know who wants to kind of jump in with this, but could somebody kind of just give a high-level overview of this game for folks who haven't actually played it yet? What is how does it work?
The premise is that they don't give a lot of context, but you are a time traveler who has traveled through time to save Earth from this invasion of this species called the Vec. And basically each playthrough is maybe 20 minutes or something, right? But each of these playthroughs kind of represents a unique timeline. There's sort of all these different worlds that have been invaded, and you're basically traveling through time and through these different timelines, they call them. Each playthrough is a different timeline, so you can play the game multiple times. And the game actually itself is very short, but there's a lot of replayability.
If you saw the absolute classic Tom Cruise science fiction epic, suddenly the name is escaping me. Shane, what is that movie that we saw together?
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow. Thank you.
Or maybe Live, Die, Repeat if you only saw the big box cover on it.
Yeah, Edge of Tomorrow, which is actually a really great movie. I really, really love that movie. It has that same kind of structure, which, like, when I realized that that's what this game was doing, I was like, oh, cool, this is great. In a way, that movie kind of mirrored a game, right? You're resetting this timeline, or Tom Cruise, in the case of the movie, is resetting this timeline again and again to try to perfect this fight against a really threatening alien invasion. And this game does pretty much exactly the same thing, only with gigantic mechs, which is awesome.
Disagree.
I didn't mention the
It's
mechs,
not exactly the same thing.
Oh, true.
It's I'm gonna be super pedantic here with you, Reagan.
Please.
That movie's fantastic too. Also, this game gets compared to Pacific Rim a lot because of the giant monsters and giant mechs. But in Edge of Tomorrow, it's literally the same thing over and over, and he's like perfecting like the perfect run to win that exact same thing. Like,
it's like a speed run.
Yeah, he's like speed running that war. Because each run is also a new randomly generated set of things. You're not doing the same thing over and over. You have the same goal, which is to defeat the Vec and make it to the final stage. But every time they've basically mixed up the factors that you have to deal with. So you're learning the skills of the game and the way the mechs work and the way the things work, but you have to apply them differently on every single time.
Yeah, but it's also not entirely randomized, right? Like there are scenarios that play out in more or less the same way again and again, but with variations in terms of like enemy spawns.
So before we get too deep into like comparing this to movies and stuff, can Sandy finish explaining the premise of the game,
please?
The TLDR version it's kaiju chess. That's the best way I've heard it described.
That's great.
It's a roguelike tactical RPG. You're playing on a small, what is it, like a 12 by 12 grid? It's maybe larger than that, but
really small, really tight.
8 by 8. 8 by 8 grid.
8 by 8.
You're just kind of you have a handful of mechs that you control against a handful of
not even a handful, it's 3 mechs, right?
3, yeah. That sounds like a handful. I mean, I don't know how many mechs you can fit in your hand.
I guess you're right.
But yeah, so it has like a sort of like maybe like a Gundam or sort of Robotech element to it with these mechs, but it also has this sort of kaiju Godzilla thing where you're trying to save these various cities, these various corporate islands. There's a sort of weird dystopian element to it because all these islands are owned by corporations and the people that run them are called CEOs. The thing I think is so beautiful about this game is they just don't give you context. They just kind of drop all these little things, and maybe you notice it, maybe you don't. It doesn't impact the gameplay at all. But they call them, like, the Acid Island guy is like CEO Singh or whatever. And I think they do a really masterful job with that, like the weird dystopian future sci-fi
subtle
things.
World building.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
More so even than FTL, which I believe we said we're not going to compare this game to.
I'm going to play a sound effect every time someone compares this game to FTL.
Yeah, you touched on that you're defending a city that's sort of like monster movie thing, and the developers themselves said that one of the inspirations for this game was that, like, in monster movies and especially in modern superhero movies, like, cities just get wrecked while they're dealing with these monsters. And so the actual main goal of this game is to defend the city. They measure it through grid power, and it's a turn-based game. And so the monsters, the Vec, are trying to either attack your mechs or more often, they're trying to attack the cities of the island that you're protecting. They all take up grid spaces, and every time they successfully hit one of the cities, two things happen. One, you lose grid power from 1 or 2 grid power, and also you see the amount in numbers of human casualties that happen when they successfully attack. And the only and the only way to lose the game is to run out of grid power. And so the actual focus of the game is not to kill all the Vec. It's not to get the most kills with your mechs. And your mech can actually die and come back in a lot of different ways. The main goal is to not let the city take damage.
Sandy, one of the most interesting things to me about this game is the way that all the enemy attacks are 100% completely telegraphed. You know what the enemy is going to do. So how does the strategy in this game actually work? How do you play this game strategically?
Very carefully. How do you play it strategically? I feel like there is at any given moment a best move. There's like a best plan, and you just kind of have to find it. You have 3 mechs. They all have a move and an attack. You have to perform the move and then the attack. You can't attack and then move. So you basically have to position your mechs.
And you can undo those moves. The game is so forgiving in that way.
Yeah, it can be forgiving. So the moves you can undo, the attacks you cannot. You have 1 per battle, and there are maybe 8 battles per island, and 2 to 5 sort of islands in the game, where 4 are islands, and then there's the big boss volcano battle. But
I'd forgotten about that. I don't want that to breeze by.
Sure.
Not only can you undo the movement of your mechs, you can hit a reset button on your turn once per game.
Which is great, because I'm sure everybody here has nuked their team on accident at one point. And, And so that is your...
or at every turn, at every opportunity.
It is surprisingly forgiving. That was one thing that stood out to me too, is between the undo move and the 1 reset turn, there's a lot of experimentation you can do. You can move someone, see how their shot's going to go. It actually tells you when you prepare whatever your attack is, it will actually tell you the damage it'll do. If it's going to move the Vec, movement's a big thing in this game. It'll tell you where they're going to go. If they're going to hit something, what damage that happens. So you actually have a lot of time to prepare. You can move a guy over, see what that attack's going to do, decide, no, never mind, I'm not going to do that. Hit undo move and go and try it a different way. And then the reset turn, at least I generally use for exactly what you're saying, Sandy. They're like, oh shit, I was not paying enough attention or something, and I just blasted a Vec into one of my own guys who hit one of the buildings, and I lost 200 people in a grid power, all because I was like, this is gonna be great, and I just went way too fast.
Wham bam!
Yeah. Oh no!
And I love that it was that it's in the fiction of the game as well. You have this sort of time reset. All of these aspects of the game are justified by the fact that you have time travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they'll do something really silly too, because there's all the pilots of the mechs are like little characters, and they'll be like, "Oh, did you feel that?" or whatever when you go back in time. So it is, like you said, actually in fiction. It's not just a game mechanic.
It is. They were so clever in the way they did that, and there was a moment where a pilot, because the idea is after the game, without spoiling too much, you just kind of get deployed to another timeline. Best case scenario, your soldiers just go to another timeline and continue fighting. But each mech has a pilot. There are 3 mechs in the game, and each mech has a pilot. And each mech is unique, and each pilot is unique. They all have different abilities. They all work together in different ways. But there are moments where that sort of fourth wall comes down, and the game acknowledges that. And I forget what it was, but it was a pod contained a pilot that I already had or something. Or a pod contained a pilot that I was already using at that time, and it was the same person. And there are moments in the game where you're like, what? Oh, the time travel stuff becomes so weird to think about, and I just love that. There's a whole world there that they just kind of open a can of it, and the aroma fills the room, and then you're just kind of like, well, that's really clever and unique. I don't know why I used that analogy just now, but yeah, but you just get a taste of it, and that's it.
Sounds like a coffee guy kind of describing.
Sure,
it.
Yeah.
What's the mouthfeel of the?
It's delicious.
Yeah.
Well, Sandy, you're bringing up the idea of these kind of mechs and pilots, and
mm-hmm.
I think one of the neat things about the game is how the different mechs and pilots are related to your progression.
Yeah.
In the game.
Yeah, so you can level up.
Like any, roguelike inspired game. This is very loosely defined as a roguelike, but it has that sort of repetitive element.
Mm-hmm.
But it has, because of that, it has this very unique progression mechanic where you're improving like the pilots and the mechs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really love about this game is that it doesn't have the grinding element of a lot of other games. You can only keep one of your pilots. You choose one pilot who sort of you want to continue with. You have one sort of all-star pilot you can continue with and take them on your next timeline, your next run-through. You can level them up. I think it's only 3 levels. There's like 1, 2, and 3. Mm-hmm. It's not a lot, but each time you level up, you unlock a new ability. Maybe it's plus 2 HP for your mech, or plus 1 move, or you get an extra reactor core, which the reactor cores would allow you to kind of equip weapons and abilities and stuff. You get different weapons for your mechs throughout the course of a game.
I'll be the guy now. That's the one part of this game that reminded me most of FTL. The way that it handles power and equipping weapon systems and things.
Nate's shaking his head.
I've been holding back this whole time because of what I said at the beginning. There's a million things we can compare to FTL because it's made by the same people. But
guys, did you notice the loading screen looks a lot like the one from FTL?
I think we need to have a section before spoiler break, but after the discussion of the mechanics of how and when we compare this game to FTL, because there is a lot to
yeah
okay.
But the leveling up is very simple. It's all just sort of automatic. It just tells you that it happened. You get XP for killing Vec. You don't have to assign any kind of XP, or you don't really have to think about it that much.
Yeah, it saves most of the strategy for like the actual minute-to-minute gameplay. That's something that like I saw some reviews specifically calling out about it, and since I'm not a huge I've watched some Gundam, but I'm not like a mech fan, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so like something that they were calling out about that was like all of the other big mech game series spend a lot of your time kind of making decisions about what parts am I going to equip on my mech, how am I going to repair my mech in between battles. Like you're like a huge part of it is like gearhead, like just mech shop talk, basically. Whereas this game keeps that incredibly minimal, incredibly streamlined. Your strategy isn't so much about that. Your strategy is the minute to minute, like what is my next move on the battlefield kind of strategy. And the upgrade system for your pilots, the upgrade system for your mechs is just like so streamlined as to be like just a really it's not a distraction. But it still does make you feel like you're having progression between individual fights and between runs.
Yeah, I think there is the only time that it really comes into play is when you get like one reactor core and you're trying to decide who to like apply it to. Mm-hmm. But even then, they're pretty frequent. So you know that whatever decision you make with that reactor core, like you're probably going to get another one relatively soon, or you're going to get several of them at the end of the island, so you don't have to think too much about it. And it is interesting. Like I was thinking about that too with the mech stuff. Like most mech things are. It's a mech game, and you're going to be playing mechs, and you're going to be talking about mechs, and like this game, it's more like a means to an end. They could be like giant cats too. Like it's not,
that would be a good game too.
Right, they could be giant cats.
But you know what I mean? Like it's not about the mechs. It's not about specifically being mechs.
When you mentioned earlier that this is kaiju chess, like I think emphasis is on the chess, right? Like this game is streamlined to the point of feeling like this like classical board game like experience. Like it's a truly like refined, polished thing. And the sort of mech side of it is like obviously window dressing. It's great window dressing, but it's obviously window dressing on what really comes down to just being a really solid, really streamlined, simple strategy game that just, it's taken away everything that frustrates me. Well, not everything. I'm still quite frustrated by lots of moments in this game, but it's taken away many of the things that have frustrated me for years about the strategy tactics genre.
Yeah. They do one big thing that we haven't talked about yet, or at least touch on exactly, is that each match is 5 turns.
Yeah.
So it really is
so short, so good.
They're very short, and you have
the short game.
Like in a lot of these advanced wars, a lot of these tactic style games, it's kind of just go until one side wins. And this game is so much about survival that it adds. It's like a gameplay mechanic that also fits the theme. You're just trying to survive this Vec onslaught and defend the city. But it also, from a strategy point of view, it gives you this sort of like a combination of tenseness as well as like impending relief that it's only going to be like, I just have to survive 5 rounds.
Yeah.
If I can just kill these guys or push these guys around or whatever, like if I'm at round 2 or 3, it's like I just have to get through these next 2 turns and I win. There's no goal other than, well, there's little objectives which we haven't talked about, but the big picture, there's no other, like, you don't win the round by anything other than surviving 5 turns. If you survive the 5 turns, you have won the round.
Yeah, and something about that, like this aspect of it, this sort of very short what do you call each of these sessions, matches, zones? I don't know what you'd call each of these
area
games.
I don't know.
Battles is a better word, thank you.
Yeah.
But each of these battles being so short made this game so much more approachable for me. So, I mean, I mentioned earlier I'm a huge fan of the Advance Wars series, but the thing that I hate about Advance Wars, well, some matches or battles in Advance Wars, is that sometimes they'll take 30, 45 minutes. And you might have screwed up in minute 5. And then you're at minute 35, and you're discovering only then the things that you did that have boned you in a way that you could never have foreseen, or at least felt like you could never have foreseen. And that sort of, that's dismal. That's a terrible experience. These matches being so short means that you're always reacting. You don't have to come up with some kind of grand strategic, military victory plan. You don't have to conquer Europe. You just have to
maneuver.
Save these 5 buildings or something like that. And it's mostly reacting to things that are coming at you. There's a really, really good article at Waypoint. Waypoint, by the way, has been killing it this year. So anyway, Waypoint had a really, really good article. They've got a person over there who's, I think, Danielle Riendo, and she's a former ENT. And she wrote an article about how she was very frustrated with this game until she realized she had to start treating it. She had to start playing this game like an EMT. She had to start treating it like triage. And I was like, that's something clicked for her with that. And I was like, that's a good insight about this game. This is a game where you are trying to manage a situation, sort of triage-like, just to prevent damage. You're not trying to build a great army. You're just trying to manage the situation to avoid worst-case scenarios for 5 turns. And that sounds really simple, but the way that it gets complicated is really great.
So the thing that really stood out to me that's really different about this game, among many, but the big thing as far as like the strategy of the game goes, and something that really clicked with me really well, is that the player turn is slightly different in order than the like computer turn, the enemy's turn. During your turn, or the end of the enemy turn, they actually prep their attacks. So you see, when it's your turn, every attack that the enemy is going to make on their turn.
Yeah.
Then you have your turn, you do your moves, you do your attacks, and then on their turn, they start by doing the attacks, and then going through and prepping their next attacks. So it's like the flip of what the player turn is. And that's what makes this whole thing a reactionary game. You know very specifically what attacks are coming, and it's your job to decide how to deal with that. And it's a subtle flip, but I can't think of any other tactic style games that have this. I don't know. Can you guys?
No, I can't. And that's a really good point too, because now that I think about it, most other games can't do that because they're organizing themselves around at least the possibility of playing multiplayer. Like Advance Wars is the game I keep going back to for this because it's like a game that
It's like the only strategy game you like?
No, no, but it's the one that I've played endlessly when I was a kid, and so it's, I just it's in my bones. Or I guess kid is the wrong, because I think I played that mostly in college. But anyway, I was a kid. Anyway, that game is designed around multiplayer play, even though I mostly played it single player. But all of the limitations are about like putting you on 100% even footing with the computer. You don't have any information about the computer that you wouldn't have about an actual real world player.
There's, you don't know where they're going to move, who they're going to attack. I think even like the Final Fantasy Tactics, like you mentioned, Shane, like, an NPC approaches you, it swings at you, it hits or it misses, the damage is randomized. Like in this game, you have every piece of information that you need. You know the attack order of every single Vec. It tells you, okay, this guy's attacking first, this one is second, this one is third, and you also know how much damage they're going to deal. It's really unique in that respect. It's really incredible.
There's very little randomness at all in the game. I think the only things that I can think of that are truly feel like an actual dice roll. I'm sure that if you were to pop open the code on the Vex AI, there's randomness in there, but it doesn't feel random, except for I think the only thing I can really think of is that about 30% chance that your buildings have of withstanding damage, and that is a true in the moment nail biter dice roll kind of thing. But apart from that, you know exactly what's going to happen when your mech hits the Vec or when the Vec hits your building. You know exactly how much damage it's going to do, if it's going to be thrown back, how far, if it's going to bump into something. If it bumps into that thing, you'll know how much damage it's going to do that. And we didn't really talk about this, but all of that is conveyed in the most incredibly good UI I've seen in one of these games. This game is a absolute masterpiece of good user interface design in a game. All of this stuff is presented cleanly. There's no deep menu system. You can get almost all of it at a glance, and the information that you don't need front and center and don't need at a glance, you can hold down a key and mouse over something and get that info. It's all incredibly streamlined, great UI, and there's almost never any ambiguity about what's going to be happening when something, does its thing.
Yeah, and the only other thing that you don't know, and this is where the big strategy I think comes from, is you do see on the map that new Vec are going to be emerging from certain spots. What you don't know is what type of mech, because there is a whole host of enemies that all have different abilities. You don't know what type of Vec is going to come out and what attack they're going to prep. So that's your job as the player to deal with the mech that are on, or the Vec that are on the. I never realized the Vec and mech until that moment.
Mech versus Vec.
The dealing with the Vec that are already on the board, and then the small amount of planning that you're actually doing from a strategy side is trying to preempt maybe what kind of Vec may emerge, and how do you set up your mech in a way that you can deal with those potential Vec.
Totally.
Doesn't it feel just great when you've got maybe 2 turns left in the whole match, and you're able to just completely shut the enemy down because you're just standing on their heads and not letting them crawl to the ground.
There have been multiple games where and it is so satisfying. The last 2 rounds, I don't make any actions because I just got my mech just sitting on the emerging spot, just
and
deal
stay
with
down.
it. Yep, stay down.
Love it.
Yeah.
I find the most satisfying part too is and maybe this is, please forgive me for this, don't think less of me for this, but I really enjoy drowning them. And I really enjoy pushing them or throwing them into the water or into acid.
Yes.
And so I'll let them spawn and then just toss them.
Or make them, because you do see the attack order, they can attack each other. And so if one's about to do like, this is getting a little bit into the strategy that we're going to do after the spoiler break, but like it's also pretty obvious is that like you see the attack order. So you've got a Vec that does 3 damage. And if it goes first, if instead of killing it, you can push it into a way where its attack is going to hit another Vec, you can just leave it be, leave both of those Vec untouched because that one's going to kill the other one. And that's both of them taken care of for that turn, and you can deal with the other Vec that are maybe a more pressing issue. And then your pilot, whoever like orchestrated it, will say some quip about the Vec are so stupid they can't even tell the difference between, you know, a good guy and a bad guy, or they're monsters who hunt each other. Like there's a ton of flavor in it. Yeah,
there's a lot of little dialogue. It's cute.
One of the things I loved about the game, just sort of the overall design and the philosophy behind the game, is that we've talked about how it feels kind of like a board game. Part of that to me is the way they've kept all of the simplicity in the stats and the numbers.
Yeah.
If I had been trying to come up with a game like this, everything would have had some kind of statistic, like, you know, percentage based or, you know, damage values in the like hundreds or thousands or something like that. This game is so stripped down that like literally the difference between 1 damage and 2 damage is like makes or breaks scenarios.
Yeah.
And a lot of the leveling up of mechs, like the biggest power update you can do to them is giving them 1 additional damage to their attack.
Yeah.
So good. And like HP, like when you get 1 more HP for your mech, like, you know, I had this, who's that first mech pilot that you get that looks like Abe Lincoln? And he got, I guess, whatever his name is. And when I leveled him up all the way the first time, he got a thing where he got, you know, +2 HP for whatever mech he was piloting. And that just totally changed the game for me. I was like, oh, +2 HP. Oh, that's no big deal. Okay, okay. I guess the pilots are all the same. No, they are not. So yeah, beautiful.
I mean, a lot of mechs start with only 2 HP. So you know, when you are giving them 2 more, you're doubling their survivability. And when you think about there's only 5 turns, you know, like that can be, now they can get hit twice, and that's 2 hits that you don't have to deal with,
and hits that you can tank and not have hit a building. You know, that's huge.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and you can repair damage, but it's only ever 1 damage per turn that you can repair. You never, you know, some abilities maybe change this, but generally speaking, if you want to repair damage in your mech, it's 1 damage per turn. It's just kind of a net neutral.
Yeah,
it's hard to come back from damage.
Yeah, I don't think I ever really engaged with the repair system. Now, I mean, I haven't played as deeply as you guys have, but like repairing, I did it a couple of times to like put out literal mechs that were literally on fire. But if I got to the point where I like my mech was really badly needing repair, like I was probably already sunk. So I didn't really engage with that very much.
Fire is the big one. The only other time I can think of is if it is near the end of the game, like the end of that match, and you do just have someone who's just their job now is to sit and block. Because every time they block a mech from spawning, they take 1 damage. Yeah. So if that's now their job is just block that Vec, you repair them so they, you know. But it does use their action, so it's almost never the right thing. Generally, you want to use their attack or whatever their special ability is, which we don't need to go into because that is a whole thing. But we haven't talked about the immense number of weapons and different utilities that there are. Just know that
and then we haven't talked about the various different teams, which I'm sure you've seen way more of than I have. I haven't seen all of them yet, but maybe that's stuff that we should save for after the spoiler break. Normally we would save any talk about the ending of a game for after our spoiler break, because by definition, the end of a game is usually a spoiler. But this is a bit of a different game in that structure. You know, this is being a roguelike. You may be able to see the ending of this game fairly early. Nate will probably brag about how early he was able to see the end of the game. And,
you know what? I wasn't going to, but if you're going to make me.
and it's just sort of part of the gameplay, like talking about the way this game builds up to its conclusion or climax or whatever. So do we have anything anything that we don't consider spoilers that we want to talk about the end game, the kind of final battle, the volcano battle?
Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily want to talk too much about the actual final battle. What I think is it's cool and it's fun when you get there, but what stands out to me, especially pre-spoiler break, is a really interesting mechanic that this game introduced that I again can't think of any other game, really any other game anywhere close to this genre that allows you to do this. The game is set up with those 4 islands that you can choose from, and you're working your way through. Once you've completed 2 islands, you can then choose to go to the final battle, and you can get a victory. You can beat the game after completing 2 islands, completing 3 islands, or completing 4 islands.
Yeah.
And they scale the difficulty of the final battle based off of how many islands you've completed. So you actually get to choose when you end the game, and it's sort of a value judgment. To me, in my experience, it's been like I have struggled through these first 2 islands, but I got through them. I'm at like a low grid. I just know I'm gonna die on this 3rd or 4th island, so I'm gonna go for the victory now and just beat it. Or if I roll through the first 2 and I'm like super powered, I'm like, let's just keep this train going and go and beat all the islands. And I just think in like strategy games like this, I can't think of any other time when you kind of get to make your own path to victory. Mm-hmm. It's mostly just like, as you were kind of alluding to, Reagan, before, like, did you spend the multiple hours to set yourself up for like perfect success, or did you just fail?
I would maybe say the only game I can think of with a similar approach would be Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which
so that's why
I recently played, and I beat 2 of the divine beasts, and I was like, fuck this, I'm killing Ganon, and I just did.
That's actually why I started saying I can't think of any other games, and then I had to like adjust it to strategy, like tactics games, because I started thinking of Breath of the Wild as well. And I think there are other like big picture, like there's other games that you can do it in, but I can't think of games in this sort of genre. And I see now we're not going to do an FTL section, so here's my chance to compare something that I think they learned from FTL. Is that FTL, if you actually beat that game, it could take several hours. A run through all 8 sections and the flagship could take several hours. And what I think would have been nice for the player is if you're like mid-game and your ship is pretty good, but you just know you're not going to make it to the end, like letting the player decide to just go for it with their current version of their ship would have been really cool. And scale the battle that way. So I think they learned from probably a lot of feedback of like, it felt pretty bad as an FTL player to spend like 2 or 3 hours, have this mega awesome ship, and then die on some random encounter in section 8 that like you had done everything you could to plan for it, but just that game was way more intense and way more difficult than this game. But like that would feel bad if you just lost there, and it would have been really cool if you had the opportunity to test your current build against the flagship, a version of the flagship earlier, and just be like, you know what, that's the experience that I wanted. I beat it with this. It's not the high score, but I at least got to like, I got to play with my ship, and I got to like, try it.
Totally.
I think it's a really cool thing, and I think it works particularly well for this game. I'd be interested to see how maybe other games can build on something like that, because I like the idea of it, and I think they do it really well.
One final thought: try playing the game on easy first. That's my recommendation to new players.
There's no shame. No shame in it.
I played on. I started on normal and wiped in the first island. I mean, I was still learning the game. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know yet at that point, but it was like it didn't feel good. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna poke around and try this on easy. And the easy mode is it's a good easy mode. It scales down the number of enemy spawns, and as far as I know, that's the main thing that it adjusts. I think it may also adjust the number of civilians in the buildings, but apart from that, I don't think there's any actual change. It's just the number of enemy spawns. But that makes an enormous difference in terms of like how manageable these situations that the game throws at you are. And it lets you experience the game in a way that still totally feels legit. It feels like, but it also like let me get to the final battle on my second try, which felt much better to me. And then when I went back to go start playing on normal, it was a lot more rewarding than when I had started. I really recommend starting on the easy mode of this game, even if you're not the sort of person who usually does that, or if you have some sort of like, my gamer pride won't let me do that. Give it a try. The easy mode will help ease you into this game much more than just throwing yourself against the first several battles and dying a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is correct about what it changes. And the score, like your final score is civilians saved. And so that's like the downside of easy, which might not matter to you at all.
Something else that I thought was really great about the easy mode, just as a side note, is that you can switch from normal to easy between runs, and it doesn't reset your stuff. It's not like you carry that much over between runs, but like you do carry pilots over.
Just one.
Yeah, excuse me, right, just one pilot. But that doesn't change. You can just play on easy a little bit and then switch to normal, and it doesn't like take anything away from you.
Yeah, I saw some people who I was reading online who would play easy to level up their pilot and then switch it to normal or hard so they'd have a fully leveled pilot. I would just say you're thinking too hard.
Yeah, that's probably true.
You're overplaying it. Just find a pilot you like and just keep playing around.
Yeah.
So final thoughts, this game is available currently only on Windows, but it's on all of the various different storefronts. So you can download it from Humble, you can download it. I don't remember if it's on itch.io. I always try to get things there if I can, but I think it wasn't there. It's on Steam, of course.
It's available on Humble and GOG, and if you buy it on Humble, you can get a Steam key as well.
Yes, yeah. And it's
cool.
$19.99, is that right?
$14.99.
$14.99. It is that indie game pricing.
A
good indie price.
As a quick side note, for the Mac players among us, they have not put out a Mac version yet, but don't let that deter you. This game runs perfectly fine if you're using Wine. Look up a YouTube video. I used Wine Bottler, which is a really easy to use tool that you just sort of feed a Windows installer, and it'll create a little Mac app for you that's got Wine all packaged up in it. And it runs perfectly fine on my Mac, at least. Great. For that, I would recommend downloading it on GOG or Humble, so you can get the DRM free copy, since I think that's a little easier to manage if you're doing the sort of Wine packaging thing. But it's an easy thing to install, even on a Mac, if that's where you play your games, and it ran just fine for me there. So definitely recommend that. They have said that they're coming out with it on other platforms eventually, meaning Windows and Linux. In the case of FTL,
I do hope they get it out for iPad, because this would be the most awesome game ever on the iPad.
So would.
Wow.
I couldn't really get into FTL on iPad, but this should have natively been iPad. This is the most iPad, iPad game I've ever played.
This should come with every iPad.
Yeah.
Everything is click
That's
this.
a great point.
And then click this. There is no, you can hotkey stuff, but everything is ultimately just click this, then click this.
Yeah.
Then click. It would be better on iPad
Absolutely.
than it is on computer.
With don't hold your breath too much. FTL, it took them 2 years to bring that game to iPad. When they did, it was an amazing port. It was really, really a great game on the iPad. But I would be very surprised if they don't bring this to iOS eventually. I also hope they bring it to consoles. It'd be a harder thing to fit on consoles, but I think it'd be a great fit for the Switch. For many people who don't own iPads, they might need to rearrange some of the UI elements a little bit, but if you don't have an iPad, but do have a Switch, that might end up actually, for many people, end up being the best gaming tablet they have. And I think that, if you want a touchscreen device to play a game on that's got a screen larger than your phone, the Switch might be a great platform for this game. If they can figure out a way to make it work with controllers, all the better.
Yeah, I just don't know how controllers will work for this game. I have nightmares of playing StarCraft 64 that come back anytime someone tries to convert a game that, I get Switch with the touchscreen would be great, just like the iPad, but I don't know how you do it with the Joy-Cons.
Well, they do.
Like
they do allow touchscreen only games on the Switch. Severed came out for the Switch. There's a rhythm game. I forget the name of it. That's touchscreen only. No, they do allow games on the Switch store that are touchscreen exclusive and have no way to play them on a TV, which is I think was a good and almost surprising choice for Nintendo. So maybe they'll go that route. So we are rolling to our spoiler break. So I've been Reagan Kelly. You can find me on Twitter at Reagan K. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find our contact form. We want to hear from you. Suggest a short game. Let us know what you're playing. Let us know what you think about the games that we've played. Let us know your hot strategy tips for FTL. You can also find our show on Twitter at _shortgame. Shane, where can people find you?
You can find me on the internet. Also Twitter at 8BitShane.
Sandy, where can people find you and all of the things that you do?
You can find me at Instagram at Sanford and Pun, or on Twitter at @MeDavidFriend. I don't really use Twitter. I have 2 followers, and it's mostly just there. I just retweet everything my friend David says, and it's mostly just a troll farm. But and then also through Coral Sword, it's on all the social media platforms at Coral Sword, EORALSWORD.
Which is on beautiful Telephone Road.
1318 Telephone Road, Suite number 3, Houston, Texas, 77023. For all your hate mail.
Did you guys have to buy at Coral Sword, or was that just available?
That was available, yeah.
What?
Yeah. I didn't have to threaten anybody or anything.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay. We had to use _shortgame. Nate, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at NateSTL, but I'm going to take this time to do my favorite thing on every episode other than talk about FTL, which is shout out. We got some iTunes reviews, and we cannot express how much this means to us when someone takes the time to go on, rate and review our show. And then what some people have been doing is actually writing like really wonderful things about our show, and we share it amongst. I show them to like my friends. I just it
we
really
are
means a lot to us.
Insufferable about it. It's
we are
the
insufferable.
worst. Please keep doing it.
It means a lot to us. It really does, as well as it does help the show. So I got to give a shout out to Scotty Pollen. He wrote, among a lot of nice things, one of the best gaming podcasts. Well, I just got to say, Scotty, you are one of the best gaming podcast listeners. Thank you for
Scotty,
reviewing us, as well as Starling with 3 G's, wrote a bunch of really great things. Subject, good content. Well, Starling, your review was some great content. So thank you for your time, for your love. We truly appreciate it. And if you want to hear your iTunes name,
my brand, my iTunes review name,
on our show, but also just know that you are appreciated and loved by us, leave us a review, and we really appreciate it. Thank
you, Nate. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, your spoiler break.
Let's talk some strategy.
Who's your favorite pilot?
Oh, good first question. Lately, I've been rolling with Arkham. Now, I do think certain pilots are good for certain strategies, or for certain teams. So I've been playing with the Rusting Hulks for the past round, and I've been rolling with Archimedes a lot, who has the ability of move again after shooting. And the reason I like him so much is if I have a lot of strategy tips for this game, but one of them is it works for being an EMT, as you were saying earlier. A pound of or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That old saying. What I would do with Archimedes, since you can move after shooting, the science vessel on the Rusting Hulks gets a shield after using its push attack. So I would push something to get a shield and then move him after attacking over to block a Vec.
Yeah.
And so he was accomplishing 2 things, usually killing one or at least putting it into a good position and then blocking the next one. And it worked really well for me. Who's your favorite pilot, or who have you been rolling with?
Lately, I forget their name, but it's a person they give your mech armored. So they absorb
nice.
1 damage per turn. And you usually start with 1 mech, like the brute class mech usually has 1 armor. But having a second one and just being able to absorb all that damage, having 2 mechs that can just absorb 1 damage every time they get hit, I've been really loving that.
That is the worst of the scions. The every island has a scion which doesn't attack, but it just buffs.
Yeah,
its allies, and none of them are
annoying.
good. Yeah, none of them are good, but there are ones that are particularly awful. And I think it's called Shell Scion,
the green one.
Yeah, that's the worst one in my opinion, because it just cuts all your damage in half, or makes it where you don't do any damage.
Yeah,
and then the one that makes them explode when they die can be really hard to deal with too.
Yeah,
that's like the number one cause of me messing things up and having to reset turns, is forgetting some things explode when you kill them.
Yeah,
so I'm like, oh, just kill this guy, and then it hits 3 buildings that it was next to.
So guys, of all the different kinds of missions, one of the things I loved about this was every mission has some unique twist, whether it's like a tidal wave or a blizzard
or the dam you can knock down or the collapsing squares.
So what of all of those different kinds of missions or locations was your favorite?
The acid island.
Yeah, acid is great because it just kind of makes your job easier half the time. If things get covered in acid, which they just have to touch it, or sometimes you'll get a little tank that shoots acid, which is great.
I love that guy.
It does double damage, so it just made it easier. Now it works both ways. Your guys get acid, but that was usually, more manageable.
Well, the trick is don't get acid on you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a weird thing in this game, and I know it's an AI choice, but the Vec have no care for themselves as far as environmental damage. They're constantly running into mines, stepping on acid, all the things that are there to prevent them. So it's not too hard to just that they run into acid all the time.
That was something I noticed just a lot with the fire even early on. Is that and in addition to that, all of the environmental damage tends to happen before any of the enemies move.
And they'll stand right on it. And if I had one and if they wanted to make this game, if they wanted to make this game more difficult, an easy thing to do would be to make the Vec actually care about their bodies. Because they are constantly, it'll be like a firebomb is going to land here and we all know it, and they're like, I'll go stand right there, and it means you don't have to deal with them, because like you said, Shane, that's normally the first thing that happens.
I also love defending the train is another one.
That's a cool level.
Why do I love that? It's cute. You mentioned
we didn't talk about the artwork really at all, but the art, that just reminds me of how much I love the sprite art in this game. The sprites are I think it's vaguely SNES-ish to me, because it has that sort of I've always sort of felt like the kind of classical style, or the classic style of SNES sprite art has this sort of feel of a little mini dioramas, right? Everything is these you get this sense of things being actually kind of at a small scale rather than being these grand things, but they have these little details that are really cool. And this has that same kind of feel to me. Although this is a game about these gigantic hulking mechs, it also feels, just partly because of the presentation, the sort of isometric perspective, and the way that the square of the grid or map or whatever is kind of arranged, it feels like this tiny little diorama or game board. And the little sprites are so they're small number of pixels. They're really simple, but they're really clear and readable, but also kind of weirdly cute. I love the look of the mechs. And
if there is a listener out there who can recommend a board game that's similar to this, I would love to hear about it.
And they're always they're all just moving a little bit. It's kind of like that old really old cartoon animation where anything that is actionable had to be would always be kind of moving a little bit, right?
Did it bother you guys that the art didn't have any face? Why did we put art after the spoiler break? But does it bother you guys at all that none of the none of the sprites have facing, like different directions that they face?
Oh,
it's kind of weird to me.
No, I see what you're saying, but
it still conveyed that really, really well. Basically, with their attack telegraphing, like the sort of iconography of like, okay, the facing really only matters in as much as when they hit, what are they hitting, and that's very clear anyway. So I didn't ever find that was a problem.
Sure.
And it's a handful of them do, right? I think the ant guys that they shoot the long, continuous dotted. They rotate a little bit, right?
Yeah, some of them do. It just depends on what type they are.
I guess I didn't really notice.
The beetle guys too, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not everybody does, though. You're right.
Yeah, and it doesn't mostly matter, but yeah, it's a good point. Probably save them having to draw some extra sprites, and also I think that probably helps with readability, because if a sprite is facing away from you, like, do I really know what the ass looks like on the different Vec?
True. Would you like to know? I'm sure there's somewhere on the internet you can find that out.
Listeners, write in with your Vec ass
There's a Reddit thread somewhere for that.
If
keep that in from the fan art.
Another to pull it back to strategy, another thing that I thought a lot about when I was getting into this game and trying to figure out how it works is that it gets compared to chess a lot. Everyone says chess all the time, and I really don't. I really think the only reason people say that is because it's on a grid, but also there's one thing that I do think is applicable, is that in chess the most powerful thing is movement. That's why the queen is the most powerful thing in chess, and there's a lot of different options for making your mechs powerful. I would highly recommend that you consider movement one of the most powerful things.
The other thing is, like in chess, it's super important to upgrade your pilots.
Yeah. When you get the queen to do +2 damage every time she, but really, like, being able to, it works both ways. Upgrading the movement of your mech, as well as dealing with Vec that affect your movement first. I just highly recommend, because that is when you get in the most trouble, is when there's a lot going on and you just can't deal with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All the times where I would lose early on were when my mechs got, like, webbed, and some great plan that I had was ruined by something getting webbed.
And a lot of things web. I mean, I think the developers know that. That's why they have a lot of things that impede your movement.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times where you have like one reactor core and you're not sure what to do with it. Movement is always a good choice. It gives you it expands your options considerably. And if there's a spider thing on the board, try to kill that first, because those things are so annoying, especially the alpha spider. Like, it is they're the worst. They can web multiple of your people if they're next to each other. So
I think similarly to that, I have found putting the artillery mech in the place where they have the most freedom of movement. So I usually put them in the back row. Whenever there's an artillery mech, I put them in the back row. Assuming they have the ability to move along this sort of like a long axis, and try to find a way for them to, if they can move 3 or 4 spaces to the left or 3 or 4 spaces to the right, they can pretty much at that point hit any square they need to. And I don't move them off of that axis usually. I just keep them moving left or right, left or right, left or right. But sometimes you need to be able to move 5 spaces instead of 3 or 4, and it's maddening when you can't. So centralizing, keeping your characters, as your mechs, as central as possible, so they need to move left or right or front or back, they can. But it sucks when you commit somebody to go off into a corner and kill something, and then they can't get back to the next turn.
So how about the different teams? Tell me what you guys have been using, or like what's your... We talked about the different pilots, and I think you mentioned using the rusting hulks, but like tell me about the different teams, and like which ones do you think people should check out or try to unlock?
So the way I've been playing it, I actually have not played all the teams yet. I've unlocked most of them, but I have not played all of them. So I would love to hear. Sandy, you've played all of them, I believe.
No. Maybe no. I haven't played all of them. I played 5 or 6. That's the other achievement I'm still waiting on. It's the one the
win with all 10.
With all 10, and then
I didn't even realize there were 10. I thought there were only 6. Maybe I'm miscounting or something. Wild. Okay, that's more than I thought. Cool.
The steel judoka are my favorite.
The what?
The steel judoka. They're Shane. You and I talked about this a little bit, but they throw and they push and they pull. They don't do much damage at all. Their artillery mech is the best in the game. It does no damage to, what is it? It's no damage. It's like the inverse of the core artillery one you start with. He damages the central square and pushes the 4 adjacent ones. But this one does no damage to that central square, but damages the 4 adjacent squares. It's just, it can hit 4 squares at once.
Wild.
Which is really cool. But then one of their brute mech throws an adjacent tile.
That's key.
Picks it up and throws it to the other side of him. So it makes throwing things into the water super easy. Or it makes it super easy to pick up Vec and put them onto a spawning point. And then the science class mech just does a thing where it just pulls them. And then I think you can upgrade it to do various things, but it also has a passive. That's right. It has a passive +1 bonus to all Vec damage to each other. So that class is that mech group is all about positioning, and it's all about moving the Vec around so they hit each other. And that really is what broke the game open for me, was when the game became not about damage, but about positioning and movement. And that's when I was like, oh, this game is actually genius.
Yeah.
Making the Vec hit each other was a eye-opening experience for me, because once you realize, like, I don't have the power to defeat this enemy unless I turn them back on themselves. That's just such a cool design.
Yeah.
I love it. Even with the original set of mechs, I have not unlocked that many mechs. In fact, I've only unlocked like 3 sets of mechs because I suck at the game. And none of them are mechs that I like as well as the initial set. So
it's I think there's a reason why they're the first. It's a very balanced group. You get to do some damage. There's some pushing. Yeah. It introduces you to the game really well. And then the mech groups, the squads that come after that, are usually like, you're going to have to learn their strengths and use them appropriately. Yeah. Like, I've not played that one, Sandy, but clearly that's all about positioning and movement.
Yeah.
The thing I like really about the Rusting Hulks, the one I was talking about before, is they're very much about prevention. Everything is like smoke is a big thing for them too. And if you put smoke onto there's a lot of ways you can create smoke, but it prevents attacking. So a lot of what Rusting Hulks is doing is pushing them around or putting them in smoke, or preventing Vec from spawning. So I
could not master the smoke. It got so frustrating.
Yeah, the smoke was pretty confusing for me. But I mean, I'm sure I would get it eventually. But it's like that was like.
Would you though?
Well, I don't know if I am sure actually.
Would you though?
What about upgrades? Like, what about particular weapons that you like? The one that stood out for me was that when I was first getting started with the first team, there's an upgrade that I came across pretty early on, like my second game, that was like, the artillery blast that it does, it made buildings immune from that.
Yeah.
And that was like, that's so good. Like, that was so great, because then, a Vec is about to hit a building and you literally just shoot the building and it blasts the Vec away from the building. And that was like, wow, that's like, that seems like a weird kind of minor tweak on the way the weapon works, but it broke that game open for me a little bit at that point. Did any of you guys have other guns or weapons or whatever, or upgrades that you hit on that were particularly cool?
Well, you do point out something that I think is really clever about this game. If you're not quite sure how a team is supposed to work, look at the preset mech upgrades, because that will give you an idea of like, oh, what does this mech do when it's fully? Like, what do its upgrades do? Because that'll tell you what its kind of intent is. So like the science mech that on Rusting Hulks that I was talking about, and I keep talking about them because I just got done like playing a ton with them. But the science mech, if one upgrade is it shields itself when it does its push, and then its next upgrade is it shields allies if it pushes them. So you can see like they are like, when you think like, okay, this mech can push things and it can shield things. That's it. So now I know that its like ultimate form is to be running, like moving around the board, protecting its allies, and getting enemies out of, pushing out enemies or pushing allies into or out of danger, right? And you can do that same with like that artillery one. You can see with that upgrade, now you know like one of its key things is that it can actually fire on its own building to protect that building by pushing the things around it. And it is really clever. So when you're starting a new squad, look at their upgrades because that'll tell you kind of how they're supposed to play.
Yeah.
And then you can modify it with weapons that you find in the game. And there's a ton.
The other weapons that you get in the game can sometimes be a huge asset and can sometimes be a huge disappointment. I think the Zenith Guard. They start with a laser mech that has the burst beam, which fires the piercing beam that decreases in damage the further it goes. So it deals 3 damage to the tile adjacent to it, 2 damage to the one behind that, 1 damage to every tile behind that. And so if you can get all the Vec in a row, you can kill 3-4 Vec with one attack, and it's unlimited. You can use it as many times as you want per turn. And then the charge mech, the little tank version, it starts with 2 HP. But its attack is it can charge across any number of tiles, deals 2 damage to the target that it hits and pushes it, but it deals 1 damage to itself. And so if you put this is the group that I'm currently playing with, and if you put that armored pilot on, the pilot starts with armor, you put him in that mech.
Oh.
And so he doesn't take that self-damage. Anytime you have a mech that takes self-damage, if you can put that pilot in there, they don't take genius. The self-damage.
Brilliant.
And so you're just running around dealing 2 damage and pushing, and you can clear across the Zenith Guard is a really cool class, but that mech is I think kind of largely useless without that pilot because it only has 2 HP to start with, but and takes 1 damage every time it attacks. And so you might be looking at that thinking, this is garbage. Why would I want to use this? But looking at how some of the pilots interact with some of the mechs can be really beneficial, like additional moves. The Steel Judoka, I think one of the mechs can move. Somebody can, I forget. Maybe I have to confirm this, but it's
there's a pilot who can move 1 space after attacking.
That seems so crappy compared to Archimedes.
To the other one, I have them both, and I'm like, one can move infinitely, or its full move after attacking, and one can move 1 space after attacking. I don't know what the difference is.
I guess because Archimedes requires reactor cores to power because the androids require reactor cores to power
for it.
But I would say if the Steel Judoka for me were really, I thought when I first started playing the game, I thought, what is the point of this? This is so silly. But I started playing with him and I thought, oh, actually, this is a completely different way of playing the game. It's not about damage at all. It's about positions and setting the Vec up to hit each other. And also it's all about pushing them into the water and the acid. And that really, for me, was when my friend Nick, who I should have shouted out earlier, was the one who put me onto this game, who was also the person that turned me on to FTL when it first came out. He got me into the game, and I thought, oh, this is cool, this is interesting. But then once I started playing with the Steel Judoka, that was when it really clicked for me. Like, this is masterful. This game is a masterpiece, and I haven't had a life since.
That's why I really think this is such a fun game for streaming or for checking out videos online, because when you have these strategies, it's like you're playing a whole different game. And if you see someone who's really good and who's really mastered the game in it, you might be amazing at the game, but you might then find someone else who's mastered the game in a totally different way from you, and has come up with some combination of pilot and mech, or some upgrade strategy, or just some different approach that you would never have thought of. It's really great.
Speaking of that, there's something that I've been seeing a little bit. I saw it first on Twitter, and then I've seen some folks doing this on Reddit. Is that it's become kind of a thing to post a screenshot of a particular scenario in the game as essentially a puzzle, and say, like, I killed all of the Vec on my next turn. How did I do it?
Yeah, it's like a chess, and that is another comparison to chess, because there would be those things like in newspapers and old magazines where they would be like, here's a chess situation, make it checkmate. Like it's really cool.
Yeah,
I've been
the developers apparently added a feature in an early update for the game. I haven't poked around. I think it's in the settings somewhere where you can turn on like labels on the grid so that it'll say okay, this is A3 or G5 or whatever. And that they did that specifically to enable people to do that. So you could turn that feature on before you take your little screenshot of your cool scenario.
No, it's great for streaming and stuff like that. Yeah. So you can go to the chat on Twitch and they'll be telling you, move the gunner to A6 and maybe you listen to them and die right away.
I have one last piece of advice for you guys, and this is just an approach. This is how I handle every single turn, and it can be kind of convoluted, but it helps me a lot. Is you basically have to stack rank every single Vex attack and prioritize them. And I know this seems pretty obvious, but this is the way I've done it, and it's really worked out for me. So you look at every attack that's about to happen, and the highest priority is always grid damage. If it's going to do grid damage, that's priority number 1. Number 2 is if it's going to do pilot killing damage.
Yeah.
That is priority number 2. And sometimes that'll flip, just depending. I'd rather take grid damage than a pilot dying, but it will depend on the situation. And then it's objective ruining is the next one. If it's going to blow up my objective, I will do that. And then it's just mech damage.
Yeah.
So,
don't be afraid of mech damage. Don't be afraid of it.
Exactly. That's the lowest priority.
Games last 5 turns, they can tough it out to the end of the thing and they get reset for the next one.
And if
the
worst
pilot's already dead,
you
get an AI pilot, and that means even less if your mech dies. Other than that, you won't have that mech for the rest of that round.
Yeah, it's just that battle. Even like you'll get the mech back for the rest of the island. You just lose that pilot. So if they've leveled up once or twice, that sucks. But if they haven't leveled up yet, let them die.
It's not that big of a deal. So grid damage above all. There are going to be times, maybe if you're full grid damage or grid power, and you want the objective, you can make that decision in the moment. But if you're there trying to decide, I will always take grid damage, or grid damage is the last thing, because that is, at the end of the day, that is how you lose this game. So if you're making sacrifices for grid damage, then you're going to trickle down, and you're going to end up, through attrition, you're going to die. So everything you can do to prevent it is your first goal.
Yeah.
Well, all of that is
you guys are making some really, really deep sense here.
Yeah, and I can't wait to go play this game some more, having heard you guys talk about it, because I need to unlock the other teams, particularly the steel judoka that you mentioned. Yeah, I cannot wait to try that team out. So I'm gonna try to haul ass towards unlocking those guys. Maybe I'll play more on easy in order to unlock some more stuff. But
that's what I do. So I play 90% of my matches on easy, just to breeze through them, just to kind of get the achievements and get the Nate's shaking his head.
No.
And
I really don't care. It just was an easy joke to just sit here and judge you.
But it's funny because actually a lot of the time that I'm playing the game, I'll be thinking, oh my God, why am I still playing this game? And then when I'm not playing the game, I think, why am I not playing that game right now? It's nice to kind of, because it's so short, you can just kind of bounce in and out of it, and you can play it for 10 minutes and then turn it off, and then play it for 10 minutes and turn it off. But there's actually one more thing I wanted to mention before you guys do that.
Sure.
Something that did kind of disappoint me about the game was that I was kind of hoping for a final boss battle. I kind of wanted some kind of big queen to have to fight.
Yeah.
And that was a little unsatisfying to me. Since we're in the spoiler break, I thought I'd mention this, but I kind of wanted some big boss battle, and then when it was over, I thought, oh, it's over. And then I thought, oh, I have to play again. And then I was like, oh, I play this again and again and again. And I realized that that's the really satisfying part of the game. but I was kind of looking for a big boss battle, and so people
I was
out
kind of
there might be
expecting that too,
slightly
particularly when the volcano, like that first stage of it collapses and you fall into the hole or whatever. And I was like, here she comes, the Queen Vec. And
I felt the same thing, especially, to compare it to FTL. The hardest thing about FTL is the flagship. Like, when you actually get there, it is a whole mess that you needed to have prepared for, like, from the beginning. And, like, even no matter how good you are, like, dying to the flagship is a real possibility, and a constant. So I
never beat that goddamn flagship.
You just haven't gotten to the true ending yet, which is you fall into the volcano and in flies the flagship.
That would have been funny. And yeah, like they had, I felt that I did feel the same way. They had proven that they could build a final encounter that was uniquely difficult. The flagship in FTL was unlike anything that that existed in the rest of the game, except for you could find a flagship under construction, which was a funny fight. But I think you're right in that I think they wanted to stray away from that. It's more like you get to the end, you complete it. It's more difficult, but not that much more difficult. It's just like another thing with objectives. Get through it and you do it again.
Well, it's something to look forward to in 2021 for Into the Breach Advanced Edition.
Right? Yes, I bet they do. I think it'd be super. Like they did just Subset. Man, they have such a good understanding of what their games are trying to accomplish. The Advanced Edition was so awesome, and it was free. Like that doesn't. I don't like. I would have paid for it too, but like the fact that it was free a year and a half after a year after the first game just showed the like care for it. Also,
that's awesome.
I don't know. I think it was if you bought the Into the Breach through GOG, one of the platforms, they were including with it the full FTL game.
Nice.
I forget which one, but it was all from Subset. They were, if you bought it, you got their other game too. And again, I'd pay double for all this stuff. But I think that they really care about their fans, and they're trying to create a specific experience that is incredibly well thought out.
Yeah, and I think they understand streaming a bit too. Like, I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm actually not a big stream watcher. I'll tune into certain channels from time to time, but like they understand, I think, the way. Well, they've picked up on something that makes this a pretty uniquely streamable game, or at least FTL definitely was. Can you tell me anything about the experience of streaming this game?
Yeah, it was really interesting because a lot of people tuned in and said, "Oh, I've never played this. I've heard about it." And other people tuned in and were very helpful and would say things like, "Oh, this is the upgrade that you need to make. This is like first second that you get a reactor core, building's immune. Make sure that this is the first upgrade you make." Or, and that was really neat. And not all games are conducive to having people help you. And this was one that it benefits you to pause and think and kind of like talk through your turn.
Yeah.
And so streaming that was really helpful because then people who had played the game, who were farther along than I was, were able to say, I think in the beginning I was too quick to use the reset turn. And then I would find myself really needing the reset turn. And then you're like, oh crap, I already used that. And so, that's kind of, people advise me to not be so liberal with that. And but I really enjoyed streaming it. It was, and you can stop at any point. It's not the kind of game where, when I was doing Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis last week, I realized about 45 minutes into it that it's an 18-hour game, and so I immediately regretted starting that because then I was like, oh, I'm committed to this for the next couple of weeks. But the thing about Into the Breach is that you can play it. You could play through it and beat the volcano several times in a stream, and people can kind of come in and out without missing much of the narrative either. Yeah. You don't need to know what the premise is. The premise is pretty quick to jump into. I would say it is a kind of an ideal streaming game.
Yeah.
Outside of the fact that like a lot of the streaming games are these sort of like first person shooter, you know, the Overwatches and the why can't I think of the name of this game? Fortnite is the other big one right now.
Battle Royale.
I haven't played
PUBG.
yet, but
PUBG. Those games they work for streaming because they kind of create these stories within the game, but like this is a little bit more of a cerebral kind of experience. Yes, there's a sort of a through line of playing through a match and seeing that quote unquote story to completion. But it's, I don't know. This is the kind of thing that I would definitely like. I've already watched a lot of YouTube videos on this when I was trying to learn the game. It's the kind of thing where just watching other people play is really valuable, and you can then immediately go apply those experiences to your own play, because it's not like you saw them do something in one particular level of a 25-hour game. Almost everything that you see someone else do strategically in this game applies to your game almost immediately. That's another really great thing about this in terms of streaming. It's a great streaming game to watch. Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you,
Sandy. This was a blast. Yeah. And I hope that our gaming interests will overlap again, and that we can have you on again. It was great having you. And I also cannot wait to next time I come down to Houston to check out Coral Sword. It's Shane's constantly talking about it. Sounds like an amazing place.
A lot of fun.
So, and also thanks to the listeners for sticking with us past the spoiler break. We already did the admin before the spoiler break, so I'll just close it out with thank you very much for listening, and join us hopefully next week on another episode of the Short Game.